It's day 325. It's also March 26th, 2020, and we are in Lindon, Colorado.
You ever wake up in the morning and ask yourself, what am I doing? And more importantly, why? Yeah, me too. Hi, my name's Craig, and this is my story. A story about life out there. For visuals while listening, search Life Out There on your favorite social media platform or use the links in the podcast description.
Waking up to 47 degrees was a bit of a jolt, considering we'd enjoyed our 82-degree afternoon yesterday. Driving through the farmlands of Kansas just below the Nebraska border, it does not take much of the scenery here and reading to quickly determine these are areas that we should come back through and spend more time. The bird migrations alone, and learning about the Central Flyway. It provides a perfect stopping point for everything from sandhill and whooping cranes to a wide variety of ducks and geese. And the Platte? That offers spectacular bald eagle activity as well. Who knew? Well, apparently, tens of thousands know, which is why these bird watchers and hunters and nature enthusiasts come here, from across the continent and beyond, every year, to observe nature at work. I'd read that there are actually 4 of these flyways in the U.S. The Pacific, the Mississippi, the Atlantic, and the one we're driving through here, the Central Flyway. And from what I've read, flyways are primarily determined by the waterfowl themselves, a natural flight path used each year as different species migrate from their breeding grounds in the north to their wintering grounds in the south. The flyways provide safe passage, if you will, avoiding large obstacles like mountain ranges and the weather associated with them, while providing food, water, and resting places along the way. And around 70 years ago, man got involved. We looked at the natural flight patterns of the birds and named the flyways. This enabled us to better observe natural flight patterns so we could better understand and help preserve each region's flyways. Of the flyways, the Pacific is the largest. It stretches from the northernmost waterways of Alaska to the warm wintering grounds of Mexico's central coast. And this flyway covers over 2 million square miles. Each of the 4 flyways have distinct characteristics. And one interesting thing I learned was how important waterfowl hunters are in this process. There's a pretty awesome relationship between avid hunters in the field, reporting tagged birds and sightings to organizations like the Fish and Wildlife Department and Ducks Unlimited. These groups working together help manage populations, and more importantly, protect and learn about the varying species here, the ones passing over our heads every day. And just a quick FYI, I learned a ton from a guy named Ryan Kirby. He's an expert on the subject and talks a great deal about it on his YouTube channel. I'll put a link in the show notes. Oh, and he's got some pretty cool artwork too. Today's drive, well, it felt like a pretty typical early spring day in the Midwest. Things clouded over moving west, and in no time, rains had joined us. The mid-40s mixed with rain provide plenty of chill in the air. And moving closer to the Colorado border, things started to clear up, but temperatures began to drop. 10 miles after crossing into Colorado, there were still patches of snow on the sides of the road. The skies cleared, and the sun heated things up to the point where we were being teased with a 60-degree mid-afternoon. And looking out over the hayfields of eastern Colorado, awaiting what I am sure will be a spectacular sunset, but not so much looking forward to the 30 degrees that will greet us in the morning. For the first time in nearly 3 months, I'm going to have to ditch the flip-flops, don sweats and a hoodie, and put some shoes on. And moving deeper into this part of the country, we were learning that most RV parks shut down for the winter months, reopening around late March, early April, depending on the weather. But throw in a global pandemic, just for fun? And even if we did find ourselves in an RV park sort of mood, that was looking like less of an option. But it's all good. We've gotten pretty dang good at picking just the right spot for an evening of reading about where we are and some shut-eye. Today would be no different. As the sun began to set and temps were dropping fast, we had traveled through those farmlands of Kansas and into the high plains of Colorado when we'd come across what seemed to be a fairly well-traveled dirt road off to the left. We pulled off, swung around so we were facing the 2-lane again, hit the levelers, and called it good for the night. And as was becoming pretty normal at this point, I had to check the phone to see exactly where we were. A place called Lindon, Colorado. Another unincorporated community, just 100 folks or so, in the northeastern corner of Colorado. And when I read that we were sitting just below 5,000 feet in elevation, well, that 30-degree night in store was making a lot more sense. And when I read that we were surrounded by towns with names like Anton, Woodland, and Last Chance, I got a pretty good sense for just how far off the beaten track we had gotten. Our kind of place. And looking out over what looks like endless plains, I tried to imagine the Cheyenne and Arapaho people thousands of years ago, hunting buffalo across these plains and fishing the Arickaree River, until one day when Spanish explorers cruised through. And for the most part, seemed initial interaction was peaceful, only the occasional skirmish maybe. But in general, the Native Americans would offer up buffalo hides and meats, and in return, the Spanish would introduce the Native Americans to horses, metals, and guns, revolutionizing travel and hunting capability for those folks. And that seems how things would remain for over 2 centuries, until the American expansion period began. And I would have guessed that out here, in the vast high plains region of eastern Colorado, American messiness, like the Indian Wars and the Civil War, might have somehow skipped over this area. But my guess would have been wrong. The Indian Wars would reach even here, when I'd learn of a series of conflicts that would become known as Colorado's War. The catalyst would be the Sand Creek Massacre.
Early winter, 1864. Cheyenne and Arapaho camped along a small creek in southeast Colorado Territory, under promise of protection from the U.S. government. The peaceful first moments of dawn shattered. 700 U.S. soldiers charged.
Chivington's troops came in and swept through the village.
Cheyenne Chief Black Kettle prominently flew a U.S. flag and a truce flag. They were ignored.
The other Cheyenne chief, White Antelope, told his people to gather around him, and he sang a song that we still sing today at Cheyenne funerals. Only the stones live forever. And he sang that song as him and his people were being cut down.
But as troops descended upon the villages, Captain Silas Soule and a fellow officer courageously held their men back.
And they asked their men not to get involved, and they watched the carnage. The story used to be told and used to be known of the...
And one of the most significant battles in Colorado's war would be the Battle of Beecher Island.
The preceding summer months had been busy, hot, and bloody. But now, for a brief moment, as he sits here with his fellow warriors enjoying a warm piece of fry bread freshly made by a Sioux woman serving as cook for the camp, all seems well, at least momentarily. Then, with all the disruption of a rifle's retort, the cry comes out from returning scouts that a contingent of white soldiers has been spotted nearby, and that an attack must be made as soon as possible. Only 12 miles away, on the dry fork of the Republican River, on the south bank of what is known as Delaware Creek, 27-year-old First Lieutenant Frederick Henry Beecher works alongside his men preparing their camp for the night. They are a unique contingent of both U.S. Army soldiers and civilian frontiersmen, a combined force of 50 in number, assembled for the express purpose of pursuing and combating the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors who have been so unyielding in their attacks in the previous few weeks. Commanding them is Major General George Alexander Forsyth of the 9th. As men begin to doze off and others take their turns standing watch, the night drags on, under the splendor of the northern plains sky. Many amongst them have lost friends and loved ones to the attacks of the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, and now burn for revenge that they hope is finally all too close at hand. However, even the most fervent pursuer amongst them would likely be shocked, and perhaps slightly horrified, to know that a massive camp of Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, hundreds or perhaps thousands strong, lies only a dozen miles away from their force of 50 men. But when the sun breaches the eastern horizon on the morning of the 17th, the rude awakening for this small force is at hand, both literally and figuratively. Silhouetted by the rising sun, lining the ridge tops around them, are hundreds of Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors, resplendent in their war paint and letting loose war cries that jar awake those who have not yet been alerted by the men on watch. As First Lieutenant Beecher wipes the sleep from his eyes and takes stock of the situation at hand, his mind seems nearly unable to reconcile the bizarre sight before him. Not only are hundreds of warriors on the hilltops above them, but also are the wives and children of the warriors, looking on and exhorting their husbands and fathers to glories. Their prey is cornered, and, to the eyes of the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors present, they are helpless. But as young men are often wont to do, a group of 8 teenage warriors make a foolhardy attempt at stampeding the soldiers' horses. Some of the 50 Americans fire upon them with their Spencer repeating carbines, a new technology that allows rapid reloading as opposed to the muzzle-loading rifles and muskets of only a few years prior. Though none of the young warriors are killed in their attempt, the first shots of the fight have now been fired, and now a torrent of violence is unleashed, as rapid charges are made upon the small camp, with war cries filling the air, mixing with the sounds of commands in English and the cheering of the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho women and children in their respective languages. As the attacks persist, First Lieutenant Beecher coolly and calmly fires upon the charging warriors, while encouraging his men to take accurate shots and remain courageous despite their obvious numerical disadvantage. First in command, Major General Forsyth orders the men to retreat across the shallow waters of the river to a small, desolate island located midstream between the north and south banks. Forsyth and Beecher assist their 48 men in forming a barricade with the very horses they had led across the river, tying the animals off to bushes and taking cover behind them. Almost as soon as the men are able to take their positions behind their unfortunate means of cover, another series of attacks ensues.
And in the midst of all this, the Civil War. And just as the area had not escaped the Indian Wars, the newly named Colorado Territory would also find itself in the middle of the nation's internal struggle with slavery. A recent gold and silver rush in the Colorado Territory had led to an insurgence of Southerners to the area in search of their fortunes. And as if finding themselves battling the Cheyenne and Arapaho during their quest for riches weren't enough, the American Civil War would break out, forcing the territory to choose yet another side. And given how many settlers and gold seekers had arrived from the South, the number of Confederate sympathizers in the area was surprisingly high. And not to mention the fact that the New Mexico Territory, just to the south, and its Confederate territorial governor had placed itself firmly in the Confederate column. The Colorado Territory, in the end, would come out only marginally on the Union side of things, but it would indeed play a critical role in shutting down Confederate attempts at closing off Union access to resources, not only here in Colorado, but all throughout the West, and all that gold in California. A winning army's got to have cash, right? Holy crap! We pulled off a quiet stretch of U.S. Highway 40 in the high plains of Colorado, seemingly as far away as a guy could get from most anything. And yet, we'd landed in the middle of a nation's history, and most every element of it. With everything these plains have seen, Lindon, today, appears to be exactly what it looks like. A rural corner of Colorado where ranchers and farmers work quietly to earn a living from the area's fertile soils. The very same soils that have known war and the battles that come with it now give way to just another season of tractor tires and tillers, and the hope of a profitable harvest here in the high plains of Colorado. Drifting off to sleep tonight, I'm reflecting back over the day's drive through Kansas, eastern Colorado, and how I had learned, yet again, how a place was not at all what I had imagined it to be. I hear a name and I think one thing, only to learn that it's not that thing at all. It's usually a lot more. The wide-open farmland and endless cattle ranches that are the signature of hard-working Americans. And with each passing mile, I gain a greater appreciation for the hard work and life they've chosen, the quietness of it all. Now, quietness is what it looks like to a guy like me passing through. But I'm not sure that quiet applies when asking the folks that live the life here. Hard work, passed down through generations, in order to provide the rest of the country the luxury of going to a grocery store. The openness and genuineness is palatable. A friendly wave actually means something on a small town street. And they care when they pull their truck over to ask if I'm doing okay while I'm trying to figure out the dump station in a place called Phillipsburg. Dougie and I have been out for a couple of walks. Nightfall is here, on a dirt road outside Lindon, Colorado. I've read and I've written for a while now. I fired up the generator and shut it back down a couple of times. And I don't think a single set of headlights has passed by. It's pretty awesome out here. And knowing that we're headed for a 30-degree night, I set the thermostat at 50, just in case, and we hit the sack. I'm not sure what direction we're headed in the morning. The real challenge? Figuring out which part of those Rocky Mountains we want to take on in March in a motorhome. And Denver's out there. 700,000 people live there. The Denver metro area, over 2 million. How are we going to get around that? We'll figure all that out in the morning. Best way around it all. And I wonder what we'll learn there.
Turns out, this thing called life comes with a lot of rules. Maybe it's time to break a few. Because you can. No, seriously. You can.